Okay, looks like we're recording. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Just reminders, as you've seen from other talks, you can enable captions. You've all been through this before. Let's jump ahead to the actual slides. And I will drop a link to the slides in chat. Welcome to a 2020 update on Fugu. I'm one of your hosts, Joshua Bell, he, him from Google. And with me is...
Hi, everyone. I'm Thomas. I'm the product manager of the Fugu project, also from Google.
And thank you all for coming. Good to see a lot of faces from past conversations about Fugu here, from many places around the world and many different organizations. We're going to mostly be using this time for discussion, so we're going to start off just with a quick recap, just spending a few minutes on that, and then opening things up to a handful of discussion topics. So bring your questions, bring your opinions. Looking back though, last time I was on stage at BlinkOn in April last year talking about Fugu. It was pretty exciting. The process had really just kicked off. We were excited to be working with folks from Intel and Microsoft, looking at prioritizing all of these new APIs based on partner requests and things that have been used in the Chrome apps. We made a commitment to following the Blink launch process for everything that we were doing, going after a range of APIs from both high-level, very opinionated APIs to low-level primitives. And at the time, we talked about how, yeah, there were about 23 APIs that we were thinking about going after with very, very speculative timelines for them. So how did we do on that? Well, I'm happy to say that since then, we have shipped a ton of the APIs that we were presenting. Just a handful of them presented here, basically at least one per milestone. And again, with contributions not just from Googlers, but also from Intel and Microsoft. And those are just the ones that we've shipped to stable, fully enabled. We have a whole bunch more that are currently available for developers to try out, either in origin trials or just behind a flag in dev trials. And running the numbers, that's about 34 APIs that have made it this far through the process. So, hooray! We did what we were setting out to do. Go team. And then we've got a lot more that are currently in progress. And you could roughly bucket these into ones that are very PWA centric, which seems to be a bit of an area of focus, especially from our partners at Microsoft right now. But also others that are just continuing to look at bringing native platform capabilities to the web. So we've done a lot. Thank you to all of the fishies from Google and other companies. And Thomas, who's been using them?
So who's actually using these? I wanted to just throw up one of those classic logo slides. It's worth noting that these are just a very few of the partners that we are working with. These are specifically the ones that have given us explicit approval to mention our collaboration publicly. And so it's worth noting that we do actually work with a couple dozen other partners as well. But these APIs are being adopted, and we're working in close collaboration with a bunch of these folks. So yay for having a real impact on the world.
Okay,
all right.
As promised, we're going to keep the intro short. And Thomas, you want to kick off the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was it for the intro, and now we're going to spend the whole rest of the time on just discussion, because that's really what we're all here for. And so the first thing that we thought would be interesting to chat about would be for all of the non-Fugu folks in the room, so folks who do not consider themselves as part of the Fugu team. Really interested to hear the outside perspective. So if you want to just take 1 minute on the clock starting now, think about kind of what you know about our goals, what you've heard about us, what you think we're kind of trying to do, what are negative and positive perceptions that you have in Fugu, and what are the biggest blind spots that we have from inside the beast, so to speak, or inside the fish, as the case may be. Give everyone just another minute. And as you're having these thoughts, if you could contribute into chat, I will be opening the chat here. reading out contributions and then asking folks to expand on some of their thinking.
And while folks are typing or thinking, the next slide is going to be similar questions for the Fugu contributors. So if you want to get thinking about what have been successes, what have been challenges.
So I'm not seeing too many contributions in chat, but I'm also more than happy to have anyone raise their hand or just unmute and speak up. Curious for any just open discussion from the outside perspective. If you don't know what Fugu is, that's very reasonable. If you think the Fugu should have different things, or if there are things that we can improve on that you've noticed. If there are folks at your company that hate the Fugu project for any particular reason, we'd love to know, and we'd love to know why. I'm going to give it like 30 more seconds of awkward silence, and then I think we might move on to the other question.
Josh, can you maybe say more about folks who are picking up some of these APIs that are new since the last kind of logo drive-by slide that we had last year? I think that some of those names were new. I mean, we talked about AutoCAD now for a couple of years, but there were some new ones.
Yeah, Thomas, do you want to maybe take that one?
Yeah, I wish I could say more, but as it happens, we tend to default to a fair amount of confidentiality. And since BlinkOn is a public event, there's only really so much detail that we're able to share without previous approval. What I can say is I encourage everyone to go check out Chrome Dev Summit. We have explicit approval in those forums to share a great deal more detail than in this one. But Alex, I know you've been working with many of these partners as well. If there's anything that you know that we can publicly share, you shouldn't feel afraid to mention it.
Well, can you go back to the slide specifically? I think, just curious.
So Zoom is one that is particularly relevant during these days. I feel comfortable putting that one up on the side because I did an entire web.dev live talk about our collaboration with Zoom and how they used, and we're looking at some of these APIs like Web Codecs, Web Transport, and WebAssembly SIMD, which is not a part of the Fugu project.
And can you say anything about how G Suite is using these APIs?
I am not sure how much we are able to publicly share there.
Okay, cool.
I'm really erring on the overly pessimistic side of things here. This is a public event, and I want to make sure that we aren't revealing anyone's plans unnecessarily.
Someone who's not here, I don't know if anyone's used it. We've had an early adopter on a developer tool called Visor, which if you happen to do any Android development is pretty killer for. They've been investing in a bunch of media-related APIs and making their app UA. It's pretty cool. They've had to previously cross-compile FFmpeg to WASM, which doesn't perform nearly as well as the built-in, and it's sort of like screen mirroring for your Android device. So it also uses Web USB and takes this whole thing end to end. So instead of having to have a native app, you're able to like connect stuff over. Over the last year, I think we probably talked about this before, but if you opt into new Android betas on your Google Experience devices for Android, you can get the beta updates directly to your device over USB using the new Web USB site. So those are the kinds of like brand new experiences that are starting to show up, which people sort of didn't expect the web could do until recently.
Yeah, definitely true. I see now that we do have some entries in the chat, And so I want to jump into those. So thank you, Alex, for preventing the awkward silence and instead filling with interesting discussion. So just starting at the top here from Daniel. Question, you must have thought a lot about how security can be explained to the user. Anything you want to share on that? This is definitely a huge topic. I invite other Fugu members who have insights from this. I'm not sure if we have anyone from the permissions team, maybe Balash or PJ in the room, but they would probably have excellent insights here.
I'll jump on. Somebody else asked a similar question in the Slack earlier about how do you deal with spamming users with awkward permission questions that they may not be able to understand. I think security goes along with that. I mean, we design the APIs to be secure, but how does a user make an informed choice? And some of these might be fairly subtle. Fingerprinting is a good example, where what the permission that is being asked for, the capability that's being granted, the fact that it will then reveal information that uniquely identifies the user is completely unintuitive and not something easily explained. The model that we've tried to follow as much as possible, working with our internal trust and safety team, is to use pickers or chooser style UIs in lieu of a yes/no permission prompt whenever possible. That's something that was used for device APIs, like choose a USB device, choose the Bluetooth device. We're exploring that for things like the font, local font access, where revealing the set of what fonts a user has installed provides a lot of fingerprintable entropy. So looking at should we provide instead a picker style UI where a user can choose what fonts to give the site access to, is something we're exploring. Because we know that model works. It makes it much clearer to the user what they're revealing, and they can just reveal the subset that they need.
I should note that it's unfortunately we don't have, or rather I should point folks to the Fugu community meetup from about this time last year before TPAC in Fukuoka, where some of our UX designers were kind enough to, Julia Lang specifically, was willing to sort of talk through some of the design choices that we've made in this area, and the sort of the library of tools that we bring to bear to help communicate this stuff to users. So it's not just the one-time chooser that we provide, or the prompt UI, although you may have seen that Thomas mentioned PJ, because we've been doing a bunch of work on heavily prompted UIs with notifications to ensure that on sites that are low reputation or low quality, we put fewer of those in front of users. So in addition to ensuring that users get high quality contextual prompts for things that they can make sense of, or that actually ask them to scope their grants, we're also trying to make sure that when sensitive capabilities are in use, those are clearly signposted to the user. So you'll see usage indicators, for instance, in the URL bar about a lot of these things when they're being used by sites. The goal there is to ensure that those things are easily revocable. And that's one of these other patterns that we try to employ, when and where it makes sense. And we're, Josh mentioned fingerprinting. We acknowledge that there's potentially persistent re-identification risk, for instance, with APIs we've already shipped. So USB, serial, other file system style APIs could give users identity away in a more persistent way than we may have anticipated. And so we're looking at ways of potentially ramping up the challenge based on how frequently or how widely scoped the grant is. So for instance, if you grant a capability the 5th time, maybe that's significantly more impactful than the 1st time. Or if you clear a cache and then re-grant it to the same site, potentially that's much more impactful than the 1st time you granted it. So trying to match the UI to the actualized risk that the user's facing.
I'll just add to that one example of the file system access where I think we took 2 specific approaches that work well and provide a consistent pattern across things. One is restrictions on APIs. I think native apps usually tend to get kind of full access to everything, and then there's just everything. But for example, for file system access, we prevent you from, say, sharing your system32 folder and letting the site rewrite that, and a number of other locations that we check. And then the second trend and kind of general theme that we apply is developing new tools as needed. And so, for example, we leverage safe browsing checks on the file system access API. And in other places, we're looking at building entirely new primitives. I think the takeaway, though, is that as is implied by our name, we do take security extremely seriously. And it ends up being sometimes the majority of the work that we do on many of these APIs is figuring out how to strike this balance. I want to jump to the next question, which I think is quite interesting. What about interoperability? Are other browser vendors positive/negative on these APIs? I would say that it varies by API. A lot of browsers are much more positive on some and fairly negative on others. In general, I think it's fair to say that on average, other browsers tend to not be extremely enthusiastic and aren't eagerly chomping at the bits to adopt most of these APIs. I think that comes from a variety of locations and positions. One of them is just the fact that a lot of this stuff is scary, and it's a really hard problem to solve that requires a large engineering investment. I think for many of these APIs, we're happy to kind of blaze the path, and in some cases, we'll end up making mistakes and end up doing some things wrong, but we're willing to kind of carry that burden. And hopefully in a few years, when we've proved to the ecosystem that these things can be safely adopted, is when we'll start to see more cross-browser adoption.
I also want to very quickly, maybe as a additional bit of flavor to Thomas's correct meta point, there is a difference between browsers and engines. It is a happy coincidence that most of the willing risk takers, folks who want to expand what the platform can do, happen to work inside of Chromium, and Fugu as a Chromium project is blessed to have contributions from lots of different browsers, even though we all ship, our different integrated systems from the same code base. So there are some Chromium-based browsers that don't pick up all of these APIs, and that diversity matters, and it's a policy question. Again, I think it is just a coincidence that we happen to have collected all the folks who want to push the web forward fastest here inside of Chromium. So we are struggling with how to rectify that with some of the various incentives that, for instance, the standardization processes tend to put up.
Yeah. Continuing to the chat, I want to call out two folks, both Michael and Nicholas, who say that our strategy does look good and it makes sense, with one saying that it's nice to see the web getting access to a lot of the same information that these native platforms have been able to access for so long. Thank you. That's great to hear. Next on is a question. Could you share some example apps? Could you share how the example apps you show are picking up Fugu APIs? Going back to the slide before, this is similar to what Alex asked, and unfortunately, I really do wish that we could share more explicit details, but I don't want to overstep any of our kind of pessimistic assumptions about these partnerships.
Worth calling out that there's a talk tomorrow by Tom Steiner about Fugu in the wild, where he is going to talk about some of the work that DevRel has done with some of these partners to adopt these APIs. So come check that one out.
Absolutely.
I would also like to point at, if you go find the web serial implementation tracking issue, there are a number of comments from developers who are very excited about building new things using this capability, and they are they're speaking up about their interest. I'd also to say, not to put Arvind on the spot, but the question of interoperability and other browser vendors, we'd have people, as Alex said, from other implementation, from other browsers other than Chrome in this room, and I'd be curious to hear what they have to say about these APIs.
I can make a general statement about Microsoft Edge. As our investments show, we do believe in the potential of Fugu, and also closing the gap between native and web. So that is kind of aligned. My question also was kind of to understand how, it's more of a, what's the success metric for us, the Fugu folks. API adoption is kind of the typical success metric, and I'll probably wait to hear the Fugu in the wild talk.
No, this is
I
actually
can address that quickly.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we actually have spent a lot of time thinking about. I think one thing that sets Fugu APIs apart is that we kind of acknowledge that they aren't going to be relevant to massive percentages of the broad swath of the web. We know that these are fairly specialized. We know that these are sometimes specific to just a small set of apps, be it video calling, productivity, photo editing, whatever it is. We really think in terms of enabling new critical partner use cases. Selecting those partners can be hard, but mostly we select them through looking at what the closest adjacent to the current web is, and kind of what we can move on to the web, and kind of what that lift required is, and then focusing on some of those APIs. I think there's great examples of stuff that has been on the web, like Figma is a great example of a high quality app, and we work with them, as well as ones like AutoCAD that had never really been on the web, and we were able to actually bring them to the web, and now we're working to enhance them with some of these APIs.
Another way of
Sorry, go ahead.
Another way of thinking about APIs, which we know will not be used, by every site, right? If every site was using some of these Fugu capabilities, we'd have some questions about what's going on in the ecosystem. But if you think about the user journey of owning a computer and requiring, having certain things that you need to do, if you can't accomplish every task that you're trying to perform using an application that runs on the web, then that's a place where there's a gap in what the platform is capable of. And so, while we're not building APIs for popularity, we're building APIs to deal with the places where users will fall down and not be able to complete their journeys because there's one particular capability that happened to be missing, meant that a whole category of applications couldn't exist.
I want to have a look at time. We have 3 minutes left in the official slot for this. And so I think we have this one kind of just looking at for the Fugu folk in the room. With 3 minutes left, Josh, do you have an opinion on whether or not we do this one, jump to the next slide, or just kind of open it up broadly? We also have buffer time followed by ad hoc time in this, so happy to continue the party going, but don't want to keep anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's not a hard line. We want to hear from folks in the room. What more questions do you have if you've been working on Fugu topics, things you want to share, challenges you've observed, anything. Let's just open it up.
Agreed.
More awkward.
Oh, what upcoming Fugu features are you most excited about? I'm happy to speak to this. I think file system access for me has been the biggest one, and I think that's being followed closely behind soon with file handling. This ability that I can kind of like right click and then just immediately open a file with a web app is really exciting to me. And I think for many users, that's also going to be the moment we're like, oh, this is like a native app, or it's like I can do what I used to be able to do.
I will follow that up by saying that in a lot of these cases, the work that we do in one area tends to lead into other adjacent use cases that were sort of out of view for us ahead of that. So for instance, having Bluetooth means Bluetooth scanning turns into something that's important. Having file system means that having access to your media galleries is something that we can finally model and maybe have an API for. That happens over and over and over again. We open up something and then we discover a new need that somebody had that was close to it, and then that turns into the next thing to do, which unlocks a whole end-to-end use case, which is very exciting.
Yeah. Next,
good question came in on chat.
Yeah.
Which was, any API ideas you'd say are too scary and won't be considered for Fugu? So that's a good one. Do we have any? I mean, there's on this slide, we talk about things like smart cards and native sockets. So we're obviously considering those. You may have seen, if you, like me, watch BlinkDev very intensely. A couple of intent to prototypes came through for things that are, if not pure Fugu APIs, or at least Fugu adjacent, which are APIs targeted at real managed scenarios, like kiosk scenarios. This is not going to be for drive-by websites, but for machines in very carefully controlled scenarios and exposing information about the local system that you would consider way too scary to expose to the web. And that goes to the level of system configuration options. So it's a spectrum. And I think that applies not just to, I think that applies to how we think about granting access to these. There are the ones that we can make it possible to expose on the open web with permission models such as choosers. But then there could be things where you want some higher indication of trust. We've talked a lot, and it's sort of mentioned on the slide. Are there capabilities that we would only grant if the user went through an install flow? And we've tried to lean away from that in the past, but there may be categories of APIs where we would want to enable that.
Yeah, just to mention some examples, Alex called out on chat VPNs. Certainly that's a scary one. Another one that's come up is power button, like just the ability to turn off the computer. And then there's also, I think, one interesting one that is not security scary, but goes against the kind of principles of the web, which is providing an unclearable unique ID. Unsurprisingly, some partners ask for this. I don't think we really see a straight line path for exposing that to the drive-by web. But if admins, people who literally own and control the laptop, are able to make these kinds of decisions on behalf of the user and then proliferate that trust down, I think, to Josh's points, that's a design space where we have more breadth.
Okay. Riju asks a question: did the Flutter team propose any Fugu features? Hi, Riju. So
yes.
Indirectly, there had been the question of, hey, Flutter, it's great for building awesome, cool, native quality web apps, requires a huge download. So there's
Josh, maybe we should just back up briefly and explain that there's actually two different types of web-based Flutter apps that you can make. One is kind of DOM HTML based, where it'll just output these kinds of things. And then a secondary one is where they actually compile Skia down to WebAssembly and then ship that in a library called CanvasKit. Flutter then uses CanvasKit to provide that additional export option. And we collaborate on the Google side, I feel comfortable sharing this, closely both with the Flutter team and the CanvasKit team. And we actually, the Fugu team ended up facilitating a lot of that early on collaboration that led to this. And so now continue, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So on the CanvasKit side of things, it's a big download because it's not using the DOM for a lot of things. It's using things like Harfbuzz and FreeType to render text. It's using ICU. And so there's the question of, are there elements of those that we can consider exposing to the web to reduce the download size? So within, I think it's still TC 39, but the ECMAScript internationalization group, they're already looking at what parts of ICU can be brought, like text segmentation is one that's in flight right now. Is there more from ICU that can be brought? And then we're looking at, I don't think we've shared publicly yet, but we're looking at, are there other Canvas text-related APIs that we could bring that could eliminate the need for such a large download for CanvasKit. Microsoft has been working on some text formatting APIs, some richer text formatting APIs for Canvas. So I think something in that space is a possibility.
Yep. We've got some good questions coming in now. So Alex, I think I'm going to tee this one up for you. Any thoughts on doing something similar to an origin trial where you only allow scary APIs for specific partners that you trust? This would be more long-term than origin trial. That's just the closest metaphor I can think of.
Yeah, this is a great question. Just as a predicate to that, I know we're hitting time.
Yes.
If you want to join us over in the Fugu channel on Slack, if you're in the Chromium Slack, we're all there. It's an open project. If you contribute to Chromium, we are, this is a Chromium project. It is not a Google project. It is not just an Intel or just a Microsoft project. And so we have open meetings monthly and community syncs. So please, if you're interested in this or you just have questions, pop over to our channel and we'll try to get them addressed if we don't have time for them here. But this question of super scary stuff that we would only trust. I think it's a valuable idea to separate out the idea of enabling an API from defining its API shape. So, you know, if we ended up with a common definition for, so a bunch of great work happened, for instance, in the devices and sensors working group, or the web apps working group once upon a time, or the system apps working group. And those designs came up with IDL and APIs that we could imagine the web having, and that they could be a good abstraction over a lot of low-level stuff, but we don't exactly know how to expose them yet. So I think that there's value as we sort of, because a lot of what Fugu is doing is not necessarily adding new capabilities to computers, right? All we're doing is giving you access to something that most of your computers already have under a different skin. And all the hard stuff is what we were talking about earlier, which is about security and determining a policy for what makes sense and where and when we should enable them. So we've gotten better about figuring out some of those lines, and we expect to get better about that over time too, both in terms of expansion and contraction potentially. So, you know, defining these APIs, making them standards-based, coming up with areas where we can open up a little bit and then maybe open up more widely as we build trust mechanisms, I think is the direction of travel. Some stuff, like, you know, mentioned VPNs earlier, are too scary right now for us to have an answer to, but we can sort of cobble together some of the pieces that are coming to the platform, like packaging and signing, to think about those other higher trust modes. So creativity there is super appreciated. And if you've got ideas, please drop them into the Slack. We'd love to talk.
And I'm thinking maybe we do a quick answer to these next two and then call it, and then continue discussion and maybe even meetings throughout the rest of BlinkOn and in the Slack. So just to blast through, where do we draw the line to consider implementing? It seems to me custom installation stuff like kiosk or power buttons could use custom setups like native apps that communicate with. This is a pattern that we see quite commonly, where there will be an extension that communicates with some native app. I think our opinion is that you shouldn't have to install a native app. And so if we could find a reasonable model by which we could delegate this kind of capability in a secure way, that's what we would prefer. I think that also solves a lot of nice problems for folks like Chrome OS, where installing a native app isn't exactly an option. And so the details of that, I think, are still unclear to us, but that's how we would probably approach some of these like unbelievably scary APIs. Is, you know,
and that's again another case for separating out how you define the API from how you make it available. And so thinking about those as being separable properties is, I think, valuable for portability for the application.
Exactly. And then the last question is, have you specifically investigated Electron apps to see what would be necessary to convert them to web apps? Yes, and in fact, we collaborate with the Electron team on a kind of regular cadence and chat with them. We work with many partners that have Electron-based apps. We have also looked at kind of the Electron standard set of APIs and done evaluations around that. Electron can, of course, funk out to native, and so the set of what they can do is infinite or equivalent to whatever exists on the native platform. But yes, this is something that we've looked into. We're getting pretty close. There's a couple of the ones. I think one of the long tail ones might be like really custom OS level ones, things like the touch bar, but also on Mac, the top line menu items along the top of the screen are some that are on our longer term roadmap that we got specifically from Electron. I think in general, the last note I'll make is that at least on the Google side of the Fugu engagement, we tend to prioritize based on partners. And so we have plenty of partners that use Electron, but we'll go and ask them, what is it that you are using in Electron and what's the most important stuff, rather than just looking at what the framework itself provides.
Yeah, and installation and all the finessing around showing up in the application launcher on platforms, uninstalling like native apps, is actually one of the big reasons we've heard from partners who are still using Electron that they like Electron. It's a familiar thing for administrators to be in control over. It's familiar, fit and finish for users. So you may have seen that a lot of the work that we're planning on doing in 2021 is around installation, not just new APIs, new capabilities, but really making installed PWAs have all that same fidelity as native apps.
Cool. I think we'll call it there at 9 minutes over time and say, come find us in the Fugu Slack. There's a specific Fugu Slack. Yeah, there it is on the screen. And always eager to chat. We will be happy to do more video chats as well throughout the week, although I am going to bed. So good night, everyone. Cheers.